Hello, Rob McComas here to present my Jonathan Edwards research final. Jonathan Edwards was a godly man who helped set the standard for today's church. Edwards is not only relevant, but his forward-thinking ideas on things such as conversion and reaching out to those in need, such as the Indians and slaves, has truly set the standard for missionary work. Edwards did these things, such as reaching out to the Indians, knowing that he could be taken hostage at any moment. His family could have been taken hostage and killed, but yet he did the right thing. He was able to reach out to the Indians and provide God's word to them. He did the same thing for the slaves. He was able to provide God's word to people that had never heard God's word. And not only that, he stood up for the ethical treatment of slaves. Now, of course, this did not come without criticism and even betrayal. Some of it came from his own family. Now, he not only spoke out against treating slaves badly or trying to do the right thing by the Indians and get God's word to them, but he was able to take a look at history in the past and see how our Christian brothers and sisters were treated, such as the persecution that they suffered under Nero. Sermon 21, he speaks of the ungodly ways of that man, and he remembers the persecution that Christians suffered under him. And he goes on to speak of the horrible atrocities that occurred. According to George Marsden, Crossways.org, his family was quite large. He had a background of godly men in his family that helped groom him. His grandfather, Solomon Stoddard, played such a key role in his life. And one could argue that he was being groomed to become a pastor at a very young age. At the age of 18, he pastored a Presbyterian church in New York. He met his eventual wife, Sarah, while she was very young. He was a highly educated man, and he accomplished that at a very young age. The Edwards Research Center writes that in 1726, Edwards succeeded his grandfather, Solomon Stoddard, as pastor of the Church of Northampton, Massachusetts, the largest and most influential church outside of Boston, turning his attention from the theoretical pursuits of Yale to more practical matters. He married his wife Sarah in 1727, and they would go on and have 10 children together. They raised them in Northampton. And the Edwards Research Center would go on and write, Perry Miller, the grand expositor of the New England Mind and the founder of Yale edition of the works of Jonathan Edwards, described Edwards as the first and greatest homegrown American philosopher. FamousPhilosophers.org would write, Edwards was truly inspired by Locke's philosophy and Newton's scientific discoveries. Edwards applied his intellect to reinvent and rejuvenate man's relation with God in a way that the experience brings God's divine blessing to his men. You see, Edwards knew that science and Christianity are not separate. Science and Christianity fits together like a puzzle, and Edwards knew that. And that's why he was so intrigued by Newton and his scientific advances, and Locke and his philosophy. He knew that it was intertwined. His longest term as pastor was served at Northampton. And we know Edwards most for his work in the Great Awakening and his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And one could very easily argue that that is the most recognized sermon in American history. Now, for some reason, this particular sermon and the image of hell has really stuck with people more than the love, grace, and the beauty of God that Edwards so often speaks about. And I think that's a shame. And the amazing thing about the Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, before Edwards gave that sermon at Enfield, Connecticut, 2 weeks previous, he had preached that very same sermon to his own congregation and received very little reaction from it. So it was truly God's work when Edwards gave that sermon at Enfield. Sadly, Edwards would eventually be voted out of his own church at Northampton. As Dr. Schultz mentions in his presentation video, Trouble in Northampton, several factors played a key role in that. Among them was that this was an enormous church. He served the largest congregation in the entire region. And Dr. Schultz points out that Edwards felt that he deserved a pay raise. And he points out that every couple of years, he and Sarah were having another baby. So not only did he probably deserve a pay raise for the pastoring work he did, he needed that pay raise to provide for his family. Now, in conclusion, I want to talk about the influence that Edwards has had. I feel that no greater man has had a bigger influence than Jonathan Edwards has upon today's modern church. He mentored many great pastors in their own right during his time in the 1700s. His sermons and his literary works are timeless, and he will continue to have a profound impact upon today's church. And the interest in Edwards will only continue to grow in modern time. Now, Edwards had a way of connecting with people. He was a very good friend with George Whitefield. And those two probably get most of the credit for the Great Awakening. What people need to carry away from Jonathan Edwards is he was a caring man, a loving man. People that he wanted to help people instead of seeing them cast into hell in that image of sinners in the hands of an angry God. He had a point A to point B philosophy when it came to religion and conversion of the heart. The goal was to go from earth to heaven, not be struck down in a moment's notice and be sent into the hellfire and brimstone that so many people remember him by from sinners. I've really enjoyed doing this. and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for listening.